I had just gotten my driver's license, and my parents were always encouraging me to help with their new delivery service. I didn't want to be a waiter or work at the register, so driving seemed like the best option. By the time this happened, I had been doing deliveries for a few months and felt pretty comfortable with it. It was a Friday evening around 8 p.m. when my dad handed me an order to deliver. I got into our family van and set off. The address was about 25 minutes away, which was far for our small town. As I drove, I started recognizing the area as being near the outskirts of town, and I still had another 10 minutes to go. I had never been this far out in this direction before, so I was paying close attention to my surroundings. I wasn't scared, just a little uneasy. The houses I passed were getting fewer and farther between, mostly isolated farmhouses off the main road. When Google Maps instructed me to turn, it led me down a long, narrow dirt path toward one of these farmhouses. My discomfort grew. A farmhouse this far out, and at night, wasn't exactly where I wanted to be, but I kept telling myself it was just another delivery. I drove down to the end of the path, which ended in a small, unkempt field in front of the house. Not sure if I should drive onto the grass, I parked the van at the edge and got out. It was eerily quiet, with only the sound of my footsteps on the gravel breaking the silence. The porch light was on, but the rest of the house was dark. I kept glancing over my shoulders as I walked up to the house. Just before I reached the porch, I heard a sound behind the farmhouse, like a creaky door opening. I stepped onto the porch, quickly placed the delivery bag on the doorstep, rang the doorbell, and started hurrying back to the van. As I walked, I began to hear footsteps behind me, getting closer and faster. I turned and saw 3 men running towards me. Panic surged through me, and I sprinted towards the van, but they caught up quickly. One tackled me to the ground while another started rifling through my pockets. I yelled for help, but there was no one around to hear. The whole ordeal happened quickly. Once they had emptied my pockets, one of the men kicked me in the stomach, and they all ran off, jumping into a car and speeding away. I lay there for a moment, catching my breath, before getting up and watching their taillights disappear down the empty road. With no phone and no way to call for help, I started walking back toward the main road. After about half an hour of walking, a patrol car pulled up beside me. My parents had called the police when I hadn't returned or responded to their calls. The police investigated the farmhouse and found a small barn behind it with another delivery bag inside. They believed the attackers had tried this before but hadn't succeeded or had been interrupted. The owners of the farmhouse were out of town and had no involvement. My phone was eventually tracked and found discarded in a field not too far from where I was attacked. The stolen van was recovered 3 weeks later, found nearly 400 miles away and stripped of almost everything. It's been almost a year now, and the 3 men who attacked me still haven't been identified. I was driving my delivery van back from a small out-of-town delivery one night. It was around 11 p.m., and it was raining steadily outside. I didn't usually work this late, but occasionally, there were urgent deliveries that needed to be made after store hours. The stores I delivered to were spread out, so most of the driving was on long highways with nothing interesting to see. As I drove along the road, I saw headlights up ahead. Although I was going the speed limit, I caught up to them quickly. It was an old pickup truck driving really slowly in front of me. It seemed as if the driver was scared of slipping on the wet road, but they were going way too slow for it to be practical. After a minute, I was getting impatient and started looking for a chance to go around them. I sped up a little bit, putting on my turn signal so they knew what I was doing. Just as I was about to make my move, their truck suddenly lost control and skidded off the road. I slammed on my brakes and pulled over. I stayed in my van, looking out the side window. The truck had narrowly missed a few trees but was now stuck down a slope. Even though it wasn't my fault, I felt really bad and couldn't just leave without at least calling for help. I tried dialing 911, but there was no signal at all. After a minute of not seeing any movement from the truck, I got even more nervous and decided to check on them. I walked down the side of the road through the cold rain and carefully descended the slope until I reached the trees. The truck was wedged in some bushes but didn't seem too damaged. I approached the driver's side door. The window was fogged over and I couldn't see inside. I knocked, then opened the door. There was a man sitting in the driver's seat, frantically trying to get the truck to turn on.
Hey, are you okay? Do you need some help?
I asked. He looked up at me, not saying a word for a few seconds, then responded, "Can you give me a ride?" I told him I could take him to the nearest gas station so he could call for help, but that was as far as I could go. After some thinking, he agreed, stepped out, and I led the way back to my van. Despite the rain, he walked slowly and seemed to watch my every move. Every time I looked back, he was just looking me in the eyes until I turned my head away. Creeped me out. But maybe he was just trying to make sure that I wasn't creepy myself. We both got inside, and I started driving. I didn't know how close the nearest gas station was, but I was sure it had to be at most 50 to 60 miles away. The first few minutes, I tried to make some small talk, but the man didn't really respond. I thought maybe his head was hurting from the crash, but either way, it made things really awkward. Every once in a while, I'd look over, and the man would be staring at me, not smiling or frowning, just staring. I was starting to wonder who this man was that I picked up. I felt like any normal person would be grateful for my help after getting stranded in the middle of nowhere. Thankfully, not long into the drive, I saw the lights of a small town up ahead, but as we got closer, the man started acting more strange, looking around a lot both inside the car and out the windows. When I pulled into the gas station, I parked the van and asked if he needed help with anything else. He didn't answer, but I felt a tension as if he was contemplating something. I tried to break the silence.
Okay, well,
I'm gonna get back on the road then. The man took one more look around, then suddenly lunged at me, shoving me against the door aggressively. He started punching me as I opened the door and tried to get out, but just then, the passenger door swung open and the man was pulled away from me. I was trying to catch my breath, still not sure what had happened until I got out of the van. There were 2 police cars and some officers holding the man down. They denied giving me all the details, but apparently, the man was running away from a serious crime in a stolen truck. Once an officer found the truck crashed on the side of the road, they called in to have some other officers stake out at the gas station and wait for him. They didn't know he was with me when I pulled in, but once they saw me getting attacked, they jumped in to help. I don't know if he attacked me in an effort to steal my van or if it was because he saw the police cars and thought I'd taken him in. Either way, it was a horrifying experience. I knew the man was creepy, but I had no idea how much danger I was truly in. If those police officers hadn't been waiting at the gas station, I don't know if I'd be here right now. When I was 18, I embarked on a solo road trip from my hometown to my new college. My cheap SUV was crammed with all my belongings. This was not only my first long drive alone, but also my first time being away from my family for an extended period, so my nerves were understandably high. The directions I followed indicated a 600-mile journey, which I planned to split over 2 days of driving. The route suggested by the map estimated my arrival at the hotel around 11 p.m., but I anticipated delays due to traffic, fuel stops, and food breaks, making my actual arrival time much later. By 7 p.m., the sun had set, and the road was largely deserted. Occasionally, a car would pass, its headlights fading into the darkness ahead, but for the most part, it was just me. The solitude made me feel both tired and bored. Around 10 p.m., I decided to stop at the next gas station before tackling the final stretch of the drive. 10 minutes later, I exited the highway and pulled into a remote gas station. There were no other cars in sight, and the only light came from the gas station itself. The surrounding area was pitch black, with no signs of nearby houses or buildings. As I began topping off my tank, I was startled by a man walking toward me. He appeared to be in his 50s, with a disheveled look that made him seem homeless. His sudden appearance was unsettling, and his brief smile didn't put me at ease.
Do you need something?
I asked, hoping to keep him at a distance. The man stopped a few feet from my car and glanced around cautiously before responding, "Don't take the ramp back onto the highway." I was confused by his warning. He pointed behind me at the exit I had taken and repeated, "Don't take the ramp back onto the highway." "Okay," I replied uncertainly, and the man walked off to sit against the side of the convenience store. His warning seemed nonsensical, especially since the ramp appeared perfectly normal and unblocked. I finished refueling, got back into my car, and decided to ignore his advice. As I drove toward the highway ramp, I noticed that all the streetlights were out. I slowed down, thinking it might be a construction zone. Suddenly, out of the darkness, a pickup truck appeared and stopped abruptly in front of my car. 4 men jumped out, wielding an array of weapons: metal bats, machetes, and knives. Their faces were eerily emotionless. Panic set in as I quickly reversed, narrowly avoiding the men who were now just a few feet from my car. In the rearview mirror, I saw dozens of figures emerging from the shadows along the roadside. Some even started chasing my car. I reversed frantically until I could turn around and speed away. Once I felt safe, I called 911, but strangely, I never received a follow-up. It was as if my report had been ignored entirely. Ironically, it was the unsettling old man at the gas station who had tried to warn me and prevent me from driving into that dangerous situation. Reflecting on it later, I realized just how lucky I was to have escaped unscathed. I still have no idea what those men were planning, but I shudder to think of the possibilities. It was a typical Friday evening after my college classes ended, and I was gearing up for another night of doing DoorDash deliveries. This was my regular weekend gig to help cover my living expenses while on campus. The night began smoothly, with a steady stream of orders that made for a decent earning. But after the dinner rush, things slowed down considerably. The few orders that did come through were low-paying and not worth the time. Just as I was about to call it a night after an hour of aimless driving, an order popped up that seemed worthwhile. It was 8 miles away, but the payment made it a reasonable deal. I accepted the order, picked up the food from the restaurant, and started driving. The map indicated it would be a 30-minute trip, which was the longest delivery I had ever accepted. Most of my deliveries were within a 15 to 20-minute radius around campus. Beyond that, the area turned into vast fields of crops with few houses scattered around. As I reached the 20-minute mark, the landscape changed to mostly fields with a few isolated houses. The last 10 minutes were spent driving on an empty road flanked by farmland. Eventually, I arrived at the destination, a dirt driveway leading through a large field to a small house at the far end. Driving through the field felt unsettling, even though I'm usually not one to get nervous without reason. This time felt different. The only sound was the low rumble of my car on the dirt path. I parked out front, grabbed the bag, and left the car running as I stepped out. The night was silent, and the house was dark except for a single porch light. I walked through the overgrown grass and up to the porch, knocking on the door. As I waited, I glanced back at my car, the field behind it engulfed in pitch darkness. After a moment, I knocked again, but there was no response. The lack of lights in the windows and the dilapidated state of the house struck me as odd. The only sign that someone might be home was the porch light, but I realized it was a solar-powered light that turned on automatically at dusk. As I processed this realization, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel behind me. Turning around, I saw a car pulling up behind mine. The headlights were blinding, and a man got out of the car. I called out, asking if he had placed the order, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at me. My heart started racing as I recognized the danger I was in. The night was eerily quiet, and there was no one around to help. Instinct kicked in, and I dropped the food bag, sprinting off the porch and around the side of the house, disappearing into the tall grass of the field. I could hear the man pursuing me, but the thick grass provided cover. I kept running until I was sure I had lost him. Once I was far enough away, I slowed down, trying to catch my breath and stay quiet. Eventually, I made it to another house and found a road where I had enough signal to call for help. The police arrived and went back to check on my car. To my surprise, nothing had been stolen. The food bag was still on the porch of the abandoned house. This made me realize that the man's intentions were likely far more sinister than robbery. That night, I learned to trust my instincts and always be cautious, especially when venturing into unfamiliar and isolated places. I had just finished my shift at 11 p.m. and was heading home. The drive usually took about 45 minutes, as I lived several miles outside the city. I always found the drive peaceful, a nice way to unwind after a long day. The roads were typically quiet and empty once I got further out of the city. That night, about 20 minutes from home, I turned onto a long, familiar side road that led directly to my house. It was a route I had taken for years without incident. Though the road was a bit creepy at night, dimly lit and flanked by dense forest, it had never really bothered me. Occasionally, fog would roll in, reducing visibility to just a few feet ahead. But with no turns or intersections, it was usually manageable. A few minutes down the road, through the fog, I saw a small, blinking light. Unsure of its distance or location, I slowed down. As I got closer, the light suddenly turned off. I was now going about 15 to 20 miles per hour when a small car abruptly pulled out from the side of the road and stopped right in front of me. Despite braking as quickly as I could, my car gently bumped into the back of theirs. Shocked by the suddenness of the situation, I noticed that neither car had sustained significant damage. Unsure of what to do, I got out and stood beside my car, waiting for the other driver. I saw movement inside their vehicle, but couldn't make out what they were doing. Their car looked old and worn, with its headlights turned off. After a moment, a large, middle-aged man slowly exited the car and approached me. He seemed uneasy, glancing around and avoiding eye contact. I asked, "Is everything okay? You pulled out pretty quickly." He responded after a pause, "Yeah, sorry." His strange behavior made me uncomfortable. I didn't want to be alone on an empty road with him, so I told him there was no real damage and that I was going to leave. As I reached for my car door, he asked me to wait, saying he wanted to check his car for damage. Reluctantly, I agreed and stood next to my car while he inspected his bumper. Oddly, he started circling his entire car, pretending to look for damage even though I had only tapped the back. As he moved to the passenger side, I saw a large figure rise from the back seat and move toward the door. Alarmed, I quickly got back into my car and locked the doors. The second man emerged from the back seat, and both of them began waving their hands, signaling me to stop. Panicking, I put the car in drive and sped around them, glancing in my rearview mirror. Their headlights turned on and followed me through the fog, but after about 30 seconds, they faded away. I pulled into a gas station 5 minutes from my house and waited there, ensuring they hadn't followed me. After 15 minutes, I continued home, deciding not to call the police at the time, unsure if I was overreacting. Reflecting on the incident, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The whole situation felt off, and I wondered what might have happened if I hadn't left when I did. Part of me regretted not reporting it, worrying that they might try to ensnare someone else in their trap. I used to work for a small trucking company that delivered frozen products to stores across several states. Typically, I would make 3 or 4 deliveries before heading back to the warehouse and then home. Occasionally, we had longer delivery rounds where I ended up too far to return the same day, so I had to sleep somewhere overnight before heading back. Usually, I'd pull the truck into a truck stop, rest for a few hours, and then get back on the road. One day, I was scheduled for a particularly long delivery and knew I wouldn't return until quite late the next day. I got ready and headed out. The drive to the delivery points was uneventful. I unloaded the truck and started the journey back, but it was already around 1 in the morning. I figured I should rest for an hour or 2 before continuing all the way home. The last sign I saw for a truck stop indicated it was 40 miles ahead, so I still had a bit to go. Driving down long, straight roads late at night often makes me space out, especially when there's no one else on the road. As I was deep in thought, I noticed something flicker in my side mirror. I glanced over and saw headlights shining from right behind the trailer, but I couldn't see the car at all. This usually means the car is in my blind spot, too close to the back for me to see. I continued down the road at the same speed, waiting for the car to get into the other lane and pass me. To my surprise, it stayed right behind me. This was starting to really bother me, as I knew if I had to brake for any reason, the car would likely hit me. The truck stop was just a few miles ahead, so I tried to ignore them for the rest of the way there. Finally, I saw the sign for the rest area and began to pull in. As I turned, I checked my mirror and saw the car slow down a little, but then continue to follow me into the parking lot. I wasn't sure what to think at this point, but I figured I must have accidentally cut him off earlier, and he just wanted to yell at me about it. I'd encountered plenty of angry drivers in my years of trucking, but I'd never had anyone follow me like this. I pulled into an open spot and shifted into park. The car slowly trailed behind me, getting closer and closer to the back before eventually stopping. Again, it was too close for me to see. This was getting too weird. I got out and started walking around to the back to confront them. Almost as soon as I slammed my driver door shut, the car reversed and drove away in a rush. I couldn't see too well, but I could tell it was an older man in a white, rusted car that resembled an old police car with front bumper bars. I stood by the back of the truck for a couple of minutes, ensuring everything was securely locked and that he didn't come back. Then, I got back in the truck, turned it off, double-checked all the doors, and did a quick glance out all the windows for any more cars. Finally, I lay back and closed my eyes. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by a bang echoing through my trailer. I checked my watch. It had been almost 2 hours, and it was a little past 3 a.m. There was another bang, louder this time. I looked over at the side mirror and saw a very faint shadow moving around towards the back. This time, I was genuinely freaked out. I grabbed a small knife I kept in the middle compartment and started making my way to the back, leaving the driver door open to avoid making noise. As I got closer, I crouched down a little and looked under the trailer. I could clearly see someone standing right up against the back of the truck, with their car just behind them and its headlights off. Fear rushed through me, and I decided not to approach any further. Instead, I shouted out to them. My voice was shaky, but it seemed to do the trick. They rushed into their car and sped off. Looking at the back door, I saw scratches all over the lock and clear marks, as if someone had been trying to cut it open. I looked around to see if any other trucks had seen the incident, but the lot was pretty empty. After a couple of minutes, I decided to get back on the road and head home. Nothing else happened for the rest of the trip. I've always assumed the man was trying to steal from my trailer, not realizing I was on my way back from a delivery and the whole trailer was empty. It remains the most unnerving experience of my trucking career, and I still get paranoid sometimes, feeling like a car might be following right behind me without me even knowing.